Matthew chapter 13, I'm picking up in verse 24. It goes something like this. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares?' And he said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' And the slave said to him, 'Do you want us then to go and gather them up?' But he said, 'No, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, and then gather the wheat into my barn.'" Now I'm going to jump down to verse 36. And it says, "Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, 'Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field.' And he said, 'The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. As for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom. The tares are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear." All right, so this is presented to us in such a way as to make it clear that this was in the context of the ministry in Capernaum, that he is, in verse 36, going back into the house that he had come out of just the chapter before. And so this is like, you can still see the scene, the same scene we've been in for, numerous weeks now, but it's still that same scene. So he's in Capernaum. He is ministering. It has been a couple years that he has been ministering. He has a large crowds of people, thousands of people come to see him and hear him. The opposition against him has become public and outspoken. They are confronting him in front of other people. This kind of thing is going on. So it's getting towards the end of his ministry, and things are getting a little interesting. And so it said that Jesus had been in the house ministering with his disciples after a day of ministering in public, and then at another time he comes back out of the house. Great crowds of people are around him, so he goes to the edge of the lake and he gets into a boat, and he starts to preach to them from the lake, and crowds of people all around listening to him, and he starts to speak to them in parables. And we had gone over the parable of the sower yesterday or last week or so, and then now he's giving us another parable. And this parable, like all of his, are little clips of real life. They are so easy to understand for these people, and as it turns out, almost universally for all time. Is the topics that he uses, the illustrations that he uses, are quite amazing that they haven't aged. Have you ever gotten down that road where you on the YouTube or the Facebook clips, and they start going over like old TV commercials, and you're like, whoo, that's aged poorly. And like there's some really funny, you could just look at a commercial from 20 years ago and think like, man, you couldn't put that on TV today. And some for one reason, others for like, oh, no one would even understand what that person's talking about. There's some things, like, dialing a telephone. We don't dial I don't know, like there's 100 different ways. Writing checks. You could say something about writing checks to somebody and kids don't even know what that means. Nobody writes checks anymore. And there's all kinds of things that were perfectly good illustrations or things you could say years ago and not that long ago and now make no sense at all. But Jesus, when he speaks, it's like he knew what the world was going to look like thousands of years later, because he speaks with illustrations that are timeless, and it's amazing. So anyway, so he's speaking this parable, and it is something that they could have seen happen. And I told you before that when they sowed seed in their field, they worked the field and then just tossed the seed. They didn't have straight rows for planting. They did not poke a hole and plant a seed and poke a hole and plant a seed. They just plowed all the field and then threw the seed all over. And so that is exactly how they did it. And when he says, and then an enemy came and just threw a bunch of weed seeds all over his, that could easily happen and did happen in their day and probably in places in the world still today. If two people living near each other, you got a neighbor, you think he's stealing some of your land, his field's been creeping over into your field, and that person may throw down bad seed on top of his good seed just to ruin his crop. And it's just that easy. These things happened, and people hearing Jesus tell that story go, yeah, oh gosh, that guy, that enemy, that rotten neighbor throwing his stupid seed in his field, that's terrible. And they had, and still do in the Middle East, they have a certain kind of weed that actually looks just like wheat right up until they bud. And it's only then that you recognize, oh man, look at this, we got weeds here. And it's very hard to tell the difference between them. And so this is what they're talking about. And this is something that these people know very well, very intimately. They would be aware of how this works. And so Jesus tells the story about how the enemy threw the bad seed on top of the good seed. They all grew up together. Now, as they're growing up, at first you think, man, great looking crop, everything's going great, everything's growing up real good. And then at some point, one of the guys in the field was like, man, I'm looking at it closer and I'm thinking, that's not wheat, that's not wheat. And so they come and tell their boss, boss, we got this problem going on. And they say, how could this happen? He says, an enemy did this. He wants to ruin my crop. And they say, should we tear them out? Which is totally reasonable. Should we pull them out? But the wise farmer says no, because when you tear them out, you're going to end up doing damage to the good crop. And so, because they might be tangled with them, you would pull them out and accidentally pull out good stuff. But even if they're not tangled above ground, their roots could be tangled. So you could see one that looks like, this one's free, and you pull it out, but boop, the other one, good stuff pops out with it because the roots were tangled together. Or even a good farmer might mistake in a hurry or whatever, might mistake the weed for the good and end up pulling out good wheat. Like, nope, that was wheat, sorry. But you can't put it back. And so the farmer, wise that he is, says, no, leave it alone until the harvest. So once it's fully, come to, complete harvest time, when everything's ready and ripe, then we'll pull it out and it'll be all right. So because we're harvesting anyway. So we'll take out the weeds and we'll take out the wheat, separate, and we'll be fine. And so he tells that story. That story would have made probably little impact if it weren't for the fact that he said the kingdom of heaven is like, at the beginning of it. Because otherwise, this is just regular life. And they just went, yeah, I've seen that happen. But Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like. And so these people, the disciples among them, are going, I wonder what he meant by that. How's that like the kingdom of heaven? And that in and of itself is insightful, because it means that it's okay if you read the Bible and it doesn't make sense to you. That doesn't mean that, well, I guess I'm going home because the Bible doesn't make sense to me. Or don't walk away because it doesn't make sense the first time you read it. Don't give up. It's okay. God's people aren't just people who are like, oh, all that Christian stuff makes sense to me. God's people are the people who say, God, what does that mean? Which is what these disciples did. It didn't make sense to them, and they came to Jesus and went, hey, Jesus, that didn't make any sense. Can you explain it? And they put in the work. If you first come to the Lord or open up the Bible and start to read and it doesn't make sense, don't think that's a signal that, you weren't called. Just dig in. All right? So they come to Jesus and ask him for an explanation, and he gives a very good explanation, as it would turn out, right? And it starts like this. The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. Now, Son of Man is a messianic title that comes from the Old Testament. In Daniel and also Ezekiel, maybe some other places, that title is given to the Messiah. And it was used by the Jews of this time as a messianic title. And so Jesus is using it of himself. It's the way he most often refers to himself, and the title that he gives himself, the Son of Man. It is clearly messianic if you understand the scripture and the Jews of the time, but even still, some people today, critics, might read that and say to you that Jesus doesn't call himself God. He calls himself again and again the Son of Man. And they might misunderstand that. And they do so because, right, they don't know the scripture and they don't know the people of the time. And I'll say that even in this, like if they were just reading this little, if all the Bible they had read was just this little section that we read, I would say it's pretty obvious that Jesus does not use the title Son of Man to diminish who he is, but he uses it in such a way that it makes it very clear that he is quite more than just a man. He uses that title because it's a messianic title. I believe he uses that title because it makes clear his connection to us, which when you see Jesus for who he really is, it is harder to believe that he would connect to us than it is to believe he's God. And that's why Jesus emphasizes that. When you see Jesus for who he is, it's easy to understand that he is God. It's harder to understand that God would connect to us. And so Jesus makes clear again and again that he is connected to us. He is the Son of Man. He is God altogether in every way, but he has become man also. Now, so just in this little section, he says, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. So when you look at that, he gives us that definition. Then when we look at the parable, it says that the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. Jesus goes on when explaining the parable to say the field is the world. That means that the world belongs to him. The world is his and everything in it. That sounds like God to me. The world is his and everything in it. And as he explains the parable, he says that the Son of Man will send forth his angels. The world and everything in it is his, and the angels are his. And he will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks. It's his. The kingdom of heaven is his, all the world is his, and all the angels are his. Does that sound like a man? That's God. Okay, so that's just we're only getting started here. This is the first line of his explanation. The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. To be clear, this parable is primarily about how we are to view the way God deals with the world and the way we should be looking at the world. It is not primarily about the church. And so church discipline and things like it's not speaking directly about church discipline. The principles in here we can apply all across everywhere, but this is not about church discipline. This is about our view of the world, our worldview. Okay, so the field is the world. The good seed are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. And so, just to pause for a moment on that, this makes clear that Jesus acknowledges the devil as a real supernatural being that is in a large way responsible for the evil that is in the world. That's just the foundation of this parable. Part of it is evil is in the world and the devil's responsible. And so that's just inherent in the story. The reapers are the angels. That's just a great line. I have nothing to say about it except I love the way it sounds. The reapers are the angels. That's awesome. Okay, so Jesus says that in the end, the tares and the wheat will be gathered up and separated. The one to go into the fire and the other to shine like the stars in the sky, to shine like the sun in the kingdom of heaven. And so it's this parable in an incredibly concise manner is answering the question of why does God allow evil in the world? And that's an enormous question that brilliant people have struggled with. Volumes and volumes of books have been written about. People have argued over for thousands of years, and Jesus gives this big a blurb and says that there you go. And it really kind of works, and that's amazing. Jesus says, evil is in the world, and everyone at one time or another has probably thought, why doesn't God just grab these morons out of this world? Why doesn't he get rid of the sinners? And Jesus gives an answer. And so he says, God waits to the end because to do otherwise would damage God's people. And you might, I don't know, like maybe that's hard to wrap your head around, but listen, imagine if someone came to you and just slapped someone, a friend, husband, wife, not you, one of your dear friends, because it's always harder to take a slap when it's not your face, when it's your husband, your wife, your friend. Ooh, that's bad. Imagine you say, what in the world's wrong with you? Why did you do that? They go, I can see the future, and they're going to do something to deserve that. No, well, that's not going to work. That is not going to work. You can't tell me that they're definitely going to do that. They might do that, but they might not. Like, what if there's a chance they don't do it? You can't just come in here and slap somebody. You can't do that. What if you had a kid and a teacher, first day of school, you at the end of the day, your kid comes home and says, yeah, they sent me back a grade. Well, it's the first day of school. You go to the teacher says, listen, I've done this forever. I can tell your kid's not going to make it. Not going to make it. I can tell you, definitely, absolutely, not going to make it. It's going to fail. So why waste the time? I'm putting them back. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that. I'll lose my mind as a parent. Like, we're going to work it out. We will do whatever we got to do. We'll figure it out. We'll get this kid through. You can't just tell me it's not going to work. And God, in his wisdom, he knows if he were just to jank out of here people that are going to do something, I mean, we'd go, why, Lord? Why did you take that one? Lord could say, well, you don't know what I know. Like, yeah, but maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they could have done different. Maybe they could have done something else. And it wouldn't work. And so he allows it to play out to the end because it has to be seen for what it is. Because as much as we trust him, it would mess some of us up, if not all of us. It would mess us up. You've got to see it. You've got to play it out so that he's proved right when he judges. And then we all say, yeah, you were right. It's got to play out. And so, Jesus gives this very simple, but I think effective explanation as to why God allows evil to go on in the world. He makes clear that there will be a time of judgment, and justice will come, but it won't be until the end. And that means that it'll be difficult. It would be easier if we didn't have those that cause us to stumble, those things in the world that cause us to stumble, and those persons in the world that cause us to stumble. It would be easier, but it wouldn't be better. And that's the wisdom of God. It would not be better. It's something we have to accept. It would not be better. But it's true. And the church, through the ages, has struggled with this. When we've had power, we've tried to create our own, to different sizes, but communities, sometimes nations, of just Christian people by driving out or killing all the pagans and the heathens, or giving them an option to become Christians immediately or be killed. We've done that when we had power. And when we don't have power, there's been times when we've thought it would be better just to go off into a monastery and then hide there, because we've thought mistakenly that we would be better if we could just be wheat with none of these weeds. If we could just get ourselves away from all those bad influences, that would make us better. And that the whole thing would be better. But it's not. It's not right, and it's not better. It is a mistake. It's certainly not what Jesus, and this is Jesus explaining how the world is. The field is the world. There's good seed, there's bad seed. There's weeds and there's wheat. They're all growing up together. And when asked, should we separate them now? Should we tear out the weeds? Jesus says, no. It's better to leave it. Wait until the end. Now, in context, this is answering a question that was very, very pertinent to the disciples and all the hearers of Jesus. The disciples, along with all these other, any person around at that time in Israel, understood that the kingdom of heaven, when it came, that it would destroy sinners, that it was the coming king, the Messiah, was going to bring the wrath of God against sin and sinners in the land, and then they, as a purified nation, would go out and get rid of the rest of them in the world. And that is how they understood the kingdom of heaven, and that it was a time of judgment. But Jesus came, and it says that he came not to judge the world, but to save the world. And so Jesus passes that on to us. As the Father sent me, so I send you. He sends us out in the same way. So the disciples, let me make that point a little better. The disciples were still thinking, just like John the Baptist. John the Baptist, when he started preaching, go back to the preaching of John the Baptist, and he is speaking about the coming kingdom of the Messiah. He says, the axe is already at the root of the tree, and he is ready to cut down any tree that doesn't bear good fruit. The winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear the threshing floor and set on fire all of you weeds. And that is exactly what he thinks the kingdom of heaven is going to be like, and part of why he struggles at one point asking, Jesus, are you really the Messiah? Because you're way too chill. Like, why aren't you coming down? And when are we going to get rid of all these sinners? He's misunderstands that. As John and James, when they go out to preach and one village rejects them, they come back to Jesus and literally say, do you want us to burn those people down? We will burn that whole place to the ground. Because that's what they understood it to be. But Jesus did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. The day of judgment is coming. And they rightly and unrightly understood that the time of the Messiah was a time for judgment. They did not understand or think even possible that it was the Messiah who was going to take the judgment. It was a time of judgment, but the judgment came on Jesus. And so they didn't understand that at that time. But then Jesus made it clear. And so Paul would say, this isn't judgment day. This is the acceptable hour. Today is the day of salvation. That's where we live. We are in the time of God's favor. We are in that day. And the disciples needed to understand that, otherwise they're not going to be very effective, right? And we need to understand that, because we sometimes try to hold both those two ideas together. We're like, yes, I know I'm supposed to be preaching the gospel, but it would be easier if we got rid of all these sinners. Like, wouldn't this country be better if we got rid of all the sinners? Like, no. We could change some hearts. We're not here for judgment. We're here for mercy and grace. We're here for mercy and grace. Because these weeds, first of all, we're not expert enough to tell the difference between weeds and wheat. I don't know, some of you guys are really good with plants, but when it comes to hearts, we don't know. And somebody who looks 100% weed might not be. And somebody who is 100% weed doesn't have to stay that way. God changes hearts. He still changes hearts. And as this world gets worse and worse and worse, don't give up on this. It doesn't make any difference how bad the world gets. Jesus saves. The blood saves. Jesus saves. He can transform anyone. I don't care what they've done, where they've gone, how far. Everyone. Grace works for everyone. And you and I, we were just as bad. We were weeds. We were a mess. We were rebellious. We didn't know Jesus. He saved us. He came and saved us. So, this message is an encouragement that yes, justice will be done. The day of judgment will come. God's not forgetting that. He's not going to let it go. But in his wisdom, he's going to let it ride to the end so that he will be proved right when he judges. Every mouth will be shut. No one will give an excuse. And it's telling us, stay focused. We're not here for judgment. We're here for mercy. Preach the good news. I'm not saying ignore sin. I'm not saying, again, church discipline, whole other issue. Mercy and grace applies, but it doesn't mean that we don't deal with things. We need to deal with sin. But as we deal with the world, our job is to bring grace and mercy. Apply it to that sin. Grace and mercy. The love of God. Hallelujah.